5 years after a brutal divorce fueled by lies and wounded pride, Kang Jae-min stands beneath crystal chandeliers, ready to seal a powerful engagement that will secure his empire. The cameras are rolling. The elite are watching. His future is perfect until the ballroom doors open. Mary walks in, calm and unshaken, holding the hand of a 5-year-old boy with Jaemin's unmistakable eyes. In a single breath, she shatters his carefully rebuilt world. He has a son he never knew. As whispers turn to headlines and the child refuses to call him dad, the untouchable billionaire must confront the truth he once ignored. But reclaiming his empire was easy. Earning back the woman he betrayed, and the son who doesn't trust him, may be the battle he cannot win. If you love intense Korean dramas and emotional second chances, subscribe, like this video, and comment below telling me where you're watching from. The engagement of Kang Jae-min, 34, CEO of KJ Holdings, one of the most photographed men in the country, was the evening's headline, and every person in that room knew exactly what role they were there to play. Jaemin stood at the front of the space, looking the way he always looked in public, controlled, handsome, slightly unreachable. His hand rested in his jacket pocket, fingers touching the small velvet box he had carried for 3 weeks without ever quite feeling certain about it. Beside him stood Seo Yuna, polished and precise, her smile aimed at the room like a performance she had rehearsed since childhood. Together they looked like a magazine cover. Together they looked like an answer to a question nobody had asked him directly. The MC tapped the microphone. The room settled like water after a stone. Jaemin pulled the box from his pocket and stepped forward. The doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. A ripple ran through the crowd from the entrance inward, not loud, not immediate, but unstoppable. Heads turned. Whispers replaced conversation. And then the whispering stopped too, replaced by the particular silence of 300 people simultaneously deciding not to speak. Han Mary stood in the doorway. She wore a simple navy dress. Her hair was pinned without ceremony. She had arranged nothing about her appearance for maximum effect, and somehow that made her more impossible to look away from. She stood in the entrance of that glittering room as if she had simply decided to be there, which was the most powerful thing a person could do. Pressed against her left side, one small fist wrapped tight in the fabric of her skirt, stood a boy. He was 5 years old. He had the jaw, the brow, the downward angle of the lashes. He had the specific stillness that Kang Jae-min carried in formal spaces, the quality of someone who observes before deciding whether to participate. Standing beside his mother in that doorway, the child looked less like a coincidence and more like evidence. Jaemin's hand dropped. The velvet box stayed in his fingers, but his arm fell to his side. Mary walked through the ballroom without hurrying. The crowd parted the way crowds do when something larger than the room has entered it. She stopped 10 feet from Jaemin, looked at him with the expression of a woman who had decided years ago not to beg, and spoke in a voice that reached the entire room without being raised. "You deserve to meet your son." Cameras flashed. Someone gasped audibly near the bar. Seo Yuna's champagne glass tilted, and the woman beside her caught it without either of them looking down. Woo Jin stopped breathing for a moment that lasted considerably longer than a moment. Jaemin stood completely still. He looked at the boy's face. He looked at it the way you look at something that rearranges your understanding of the last 5 years in under 4 seconds. The child looked back at him with cautious, measuring eyes and did not smile and did not reach out and stayed exactly where he was, close to his mother, watching this tall stranger in the expensive suit try to figure out what expression to wear. The MC had moved away from the microphone. The evening had ended, and everyone in the room understood this, even if no one had announced it yet. Jaemin said, quietly, "We need to go somewhere private." If you're new here and this story already has you gripped, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we post stories like this every week, and you do not want to miss what happens next. A hotel staff member led them to the VIP corridor behind the ballroom, a long, carpeted hallway with gold-trimmed walls, and the muffled sound of the party continuing without its host. Mary walked with Siwon close beside her. Jaemin followed. None of them spoke in the elevator. The corridor was quiet. Mary stopped near the far wall and turned around. 5 years of distance sat between them like furniture that had been arranged by someone else, and neither of them knew how to move. Say what you came to say, Jaemin said. I came to introduce you to your son, Mary said. His name is Kang Saiwon. He is 5 years and 3 months old. He has never missed a day of school. He is afraid of loud fireworks and he thinks broccoli is a personal insult. She glanced down at the boy briefly, and something in her expression went soft for exactly 1 second before it composed itself again. He deserved to know his father exists. That is why I am here. Jaemin looked at her. The controlled surface of his face was doing its work, but around his eyes something had loosened. You were pregnant when we signed the divorce papers. Yes. You never. I tried. The words were quiet. They were also absolute. I came to your office 3 days before you signed. Your assistant told me you were in a meeting and had asked not to be disturbed by personal matters. She let that sit for exactly 1 beat. I went to your apartment that night. Your mother answered the door. She told me you had made your decision and that it was better for everyone if I accepted it. Jaemin's jaw moved. He said nothing. The photographs were fabricated, Mary continued. The man in the pictures was my cousin. We were at our grandmother's funeral. Someone cropped the images, removed the context, and sent them to your publicist with a note designed to look like they had come from someone close to me. She watched his face. You saw them on a Tuesday. By Friday you had signed the papers. You never called me. You never asked. He stopped. You were what? She was not cruel about it. She was simply waiting. He had no clean answer. He had the truth, which was that he had been furious and humiliated, and had chosen the speed of certainty over the discomfort of doubt. He had been a man who prized control, and the photographs had made him feel exposed, and he had solved that by ending the marriage before it could end him first. He crouched slowly, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Saiwon watched him with careful, still eyes, the expression of a child who has learned to assess adults before deciding how much to offer them. Saiwon, Jaemin said, quietly. The boy looked at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, Mom said you don't like us. Jaemin's extended hand stayed in the air for a second, then lowered to his knee. He looked up at Mary. She held his gaze without flinching. She had not prepped the boy to say that. It was simply what Saiwon had understood from 5 years of watching his mother navigate the world without a partner, from the careful way she never spoke badly of his father, but also never spoke of him at all. Children absorb what is not said just as efficiently as what is. Jaemin stood slowly. I need to hear everything, he said. Not here. They took the elevator to the underground parking structure. The overhead lights hummed. Their footsteps were the loudest thing in the space. Jaemin walked alongside them and kept his hands in his pockets because he was, for perhaps the first time in years, genuinely uncertain what the next correct move was. Mary stopped near the center of the garage, away from the attendance booth, and turned to face him. 5 years ago, she said, I was 6 weeks pregnant when your lawyer called my lawyer. I found out the papers were filed from a text message. She paused. Not even a phone call. A text from my lawyer saying the documents had been submitted. Jaemin exhaled through his nose. I tried to reach you for 2 days after that. I wrote you 11 messages and sent none of them. I stood outside your building in the rain the night the papers went through and watched the notification come in on my phone. She said this without self-pity, the way someone recounts facts they have long since finished crying about. Then I went home. And I decided that a man who could end a marriage without a single conversation did not deserve to make decisions about my child. Why no? Jaemin said. Why come back now? Because Saiwon started asking questions I couldn't answer with silence anymore. She looked at her son, who was crouched near a concrete pillar examining something small on the ground with intense focus, the private world of a child running parallel to the adult conversation above him. He asked me last month if his father knew his name. And I realized I had protected him from the absence of you for long enough. What I couldn't protect him from was growing up and understanding that I had made the choice for him. The air in the garage was cool. Somewhere above them the party was still happening, the music still moving, 300 people reshuffling the story of the evening in real time. I was wrong, Jaemin said. The words came out without the defensive structure that usually surrounded them, no qualifications, no redirected blame. Just those 3 words, placed in front of her like something he had carried to a location he no longer knew how to leave with. Mary looked at him. She had waited a long time to hear those words, and now that they had arrived, she found they did not fix anything, which she had suspected and prepared for, but which still landed differently than expected. "You were wrong," she agreed. "You were also cruel. There is a difference, and I need you to understand both." "I understand." "No," she said, not unkindly. "Not yet, but you might, eventually." She looked at Siwon, who had stood and was watching both of them with the alert stillness of a child who senses the conversation is about him. "For his sake, I hope so." Jaemin stood slowly. "What do you need from me?" he said. "I need you to prove that you understand what fatherhood actually is," Mary said. "Not with contracts. Not with assets. With time. With consistency. With showing up when it is inconvenient and staying when it is hard." She picked up her bag. "I am not here to punish you, Jaemin. I am here because my son deserves a father. But I will not hand him to a man who has not yet learned how to stay." They went to a hospital the following morning for a DNA test, not because Jaemin doubted it, but because the legal machinery of the situation required it. And because both of them understood that documentation mattered more than feelings in the rooms that came next. The waiting area was beige and quiet. Siwon sat between them on the plastic chairs with a sheet of paper and felt tip markers that Mary produced from her bag. He drew with the focused intensity of a child working on something important, tongue pressed lightly between his teeth. Jaemin sat with his hands between his knees and watched his son draw. "What is he making?" he asked Mary, keeping his voice low. "A brachiosaurus," she said. "He's been drawing dinosaurs for 8 months. He can tell you the Latin names of 14 species and has opinions about which ones would win in a fight." Jaemin looked at the drawing. The dinosaur had a long neck, enormous feet, and was surrounded by what appeared to be very small people running in various directions. "The people are running away," he said. "He says they're cheering," Mary said. "He thinks everything is cheering." Jaemin was quiet for a moment. "What is his favorite food?" Mary glanced at him. "Tteokbokki, the street cart outside his school. He has been trying to convince me to let him eat it for breakfast for 3 months. Has it worked?" "Once," she said. "On his birthday." The doctor arrived with a clipboard. The result was 99.9%. Kang Jaemin was officially, legally Kang Siwon's father. He received the paper and held it and felt simultaneously that it contained everything and changed nothing that actually mattered. "Let me take responsibility," he said to Mary in the hallway outside the office. "Whatever that looks like. Whatever you need." Being his father, Mary said, is not a financial arrangement. "I know that. Do you?" She looked at him levelly. "Because every time you say, 'take responsibility,' it sounds like something you say in a boardroom." He held her gaze. "Then tell me how to say it differently." She was quiet for a moment. Siwon came out of the office behind them still carrying his Brachiosaurus drawing, which he had apparently been allowed to finish while the adults spoke to the doctor. He held it up toward Jaemin with a slightly begrudging expression of someone making an offering they are not entirely sure about. "It's a Brachiosaurus," Siwon said. "I know," Jaemin said. He crouched, studied the drawing with genuine attention. "Why is it bigger than the mountain?" Siwon looked at the drawing as if this were a question he had not considered but found reasonable. "Because it eats the mountain," he said, with complete authority. Then he took the drawing back and walked to his mother's side. It was, Jaemin understood, the longest conversation they had had. He would take it. If this story is hitting you right in the chest, drop a comment below and tell us what you think Jaemin needs to do to earn their trust. We read every single one. That evening, Jaemin drove them to the Han River. Mary had not agreed to it exactly, he had asked, and she had paused long enough for him to understand she was considering it, and then she had said fine, 1 hour. They sat on a bench near the water, while Siwon ran short loops on the path ahead of them, arms out, apparently simulating flight. The city reflected off the river in long lines of light. The air carried that particular quality of early evening in Seoul, almost cool, slightly electric, the kind of air that makes it briefly possible to believe things can be different. "Tell me," Jaemin said. Mary looked at him. "Tell you what specifically?" "What the last 5 years were actually like. Not the summary. The actual version." She watched Siwon for a moment. Then she turned back to the water. "For the first year I worked 2 jobs," she said. "Data entry during the day. Copy editing at night. My sister watched Siwon during the evenings. I was tired in a way that doesn't have a clean word, the kind where you are sitting down but your body has forgotten what rest is. Jamin said nothing. He was, for perhaps the first time in a very long conversation, simply listening. When the story broke in the press, the divorce, the photographs, my name was attached to it in a way I could not control. I had 3 job offers rescinded in 1 month. People I had worked with for years stopped calling. She paused. I moved to a smaller apartment. I stopped going to places I might be recognized. I built a life the size of a room and I made it enough. And Saiwin. A small smile crossed her face. Saiwin has never once understood that any of this was supposed to be hard, she said. He woke up happy every morning. He learned to walk in that small apartment, and he was so proud of himself that he kept doing it in circles for an entire afternoon. He made friends the first day of school and came home and told me their complete life histories. She paused. He has never had a father, and he has never, not once, seemed to understand that this was something to grieve. He just decided the world was good and kept moving through it. Jamin looked at him for a long time. Tell me what he likes, he said. Tell me everything I missed. Mary looked at him. Something passed across her face, not softness, not forgiveness, but the specific expression of a person who has just witnessed something they were not expecting and are quietly recalibrating. Then she turned back toward the water and began to speak, and for the first time in 5 years, Kang Jamin listened to a conversation about his son and did not miss a single word. Saiwin eventually tired of being an airplane and came to sit between them on the bench, breathing hard, cheeks flushed. He leaned against Mary's arm and looked up at Jamin with the open, unguarded curiosity of a child who had not yet decided whether this person was worth being cautious about. Do you like dinosaurs? Saiwin asked. Jamin looked at him. I don't know very much about them, he said. I think I should learn. Saiwin considered this with the serious expression of an expert being consulted. The Spinosaurus was bigger than the T-Rex, he said. Most people don't know that. They think the T-Rex was the biggest, but they're wrong. He said this without particular arrogance, just the steady confidence of someone sharing information they are certain of. I did not know that, Jamin said. Now you do, Saiwin said, and leaned back against his mother's arm again, apparently satisfied that he had done his part for Jamin's education. Mary was looking at the river, but the corner of her mouth had moved, just slightly, in a direction it had not moved in a long time in Jamin's presence. He did not comment on it. He stored it. On the drive to their apartment, a neighborhood 40 minutes from the river, the kind of street that had good light and old trees and a street cart on the corner that smelled of tteokbokki even at 9 in the evening. Saiwin fell asleep in his car seat with the Brachiosaurus drawing folded in his hand. Jamin watched him in the rearview mirror at a red light and felt the full weight of 5 years of missed ordinary moments settle on him in a way that the DNA result and the hotel ballroom and every conversation before this one had not managed to accomplish. Mary noticed him watching. He sleeps like that everywhere, she said quietly. He decided at age 2 that sleep was not an inconvenience and committed to it completely. I don't know who he got that from. Not me, Jamin said. I haven't slept properly in years. She looked at him. He looked back at the road. I know, she said, after a moment. And somehow those 2 words carried considerably more history than anything else they had said to each other that day. He pulled up outside the apartment building, carried a sleeping Saiwin to the door because Mary's hands were full and the stairs were narrow, and because it was the first time he had held his son. He handed Saiwin over at the door carefully, the way you hand over something you cannot pretend you don't want to keep holding. Mary stood in the doorway with their son asleep on her shoulder, and there was a particular kind of ache in looking at that, the ordinary weight of a child, the extraordinary cost of 5 years. 1 visit, she said. Supervised. Starting this week. We see how it goes. Thank you, Jamin said. She looked at him for a moment, that same recalibrating expression, brief and unreadable. Then she stepped inside and the door closed, and he stood in the stairwell of a building a world away from the hotel he had left 3 hours ago and understood that the hardest part had not yet begun. The first supervised visit was a Saturday morning. Jamin arrived at the apartment building at 9, not early enough to be pushy, not late enough to seem indifferent. He had thought carefully about this. He had also thought carefully about what to bring, and after rejecting 12 different options had arrived with a single book on dinosaurs, the kind with photographs on every page and Latin names in small print beneath each one. Not a gesture designed to impress. Just something a boy who liked dinosaurs might actually want. Mary opened the door in a sweatshirt, which told him this was not a performance for his benefit. She looked at the book, looked at him, and stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was clean and warm and entirely itself. Bookshelves made from planks and stacked bricks along one wall. Drawings pinned in rows above the kitchen table, most of them dinosaurs. A few of what appeared to be Mary and Cywin rendered in crayon with enormous heads and small bodies. A rug in the center of the living room that had clearly survived a significant amount of childhood. It was a home. Not a showroom, not a statement, a home, assembled deliberately by a woman who had decided that what she could give her son was a place that felt like safety. Jamin stood in the entrance and understood immediately that bringing a larger, more impressive space to the table would be one of the least intelligent things he could offer. Cywin appeared from the hallway in dinosaur pajamas, stopped when he saw Jamin, and looked at the book in his hands. "Is that for me?" he said. "If you want it," Jamin said. Cywin walked over, took the book, examined the cover with the focused appraisal of a collector, then opened to a random page. His eyes moved across it. He looked up. "This one's wrong," he said, pointing at a caption. "They updated the classification. It's not in that family anymore." Jamin blinked. "How do you know that?" "My teacher has the new version," Cywin said, as if this were obvious. Then he went to the rug and sat down with the book and began going through it page by page, occasionally shaking his head at inaccuracies. Mary, who had watched this exchange from the kitchen doorway, turned away to make tea. But Jamin caught the brief, private expression on her face before she turned, something between amusement and grief, which was the particular combination that parenting a child alone produced sometimes when you suddenly had a witness to how remarkable the child was. He sat down on the floor near the rug, at a distance that said he was available without crowding him. Cywin did not look up, but shifted the book slightly in his direction so he could see. It was the smallest possible invitation, barely perceptible, offered with great casualness. Jamin accepted it without comment. That hour, awkward, quiet, punctuated by Cywin's running commentary on outdated paleontological classifications and several firm corrections, was the best hour Jamin had spent in years. The week that followed, he showed up on Tuesday afternoon and waited outside the school gate without going in. He had not been asked to pick Cywin up. He had not been invited. He simply wanted to see what the ordinary texture of his son's day looked like the moment the doors opened, the controlled chaos of children released into the afternoon. The way Cywin came through the gate holding his backpack straps and scanning the crowd with the same searching and assessing expression he had worn in the hotel ballroom. Mary was waiting near the gate. She saw Jamin standing 15 meters away and said nothing. He stayed where he was. She collected Cywin, and they walked to the tegbaki cart on the corner, and Jamin watched his son eat from a paper cup with the focused joy of a person consuming something they have campaigned for. And he stayed on his side of the invisible line he had drawn and did not cross it. Mary looked at him once, across the street. He nodded. She turned back to Cywin. That was enough for that day. The school had a small art exhibition the following Thursday, a wall of paintings in the corridor outside the classrooms, each child standing beside their work while parents moved along looking at it. Jamin attended. He did not tell Mary beforehand. He arrived late enough to avoid the initial crowd, stood at the back, and found Cywin's painting a large and technically ambitious Spinosaurus rendered in blue and green, standing in water, looking out at something beyond the frame with an expression that was, against all expectation, melancholy. He stood in front of it for a long time. It was not what he had expected. He had expected bold, bright, happy. He had expected the confident chaos of a child's painting. He had not expected this, the careful stillness of it, the deliberate loneliness in those eyes. Mary appeared beside him. She had known he was there. Cywin had spotted him immediately and reported this to her with the efficiency of a small intelligence operative. She stood beside Jamin and looked at the painting. He spent 4 sessions on the water, she said quietly. He said it had to look like the dinosaur was far from home. Jamin looked at the painting. He thought about a 5-year-old deciding that the most powerful dinosaur that ever existed should look like it was far from home, and painting that feeling in blue and green with small hands and complete conviction. "He's extraordinary," he said. "Yes," Mary said. There was no argument in her voice. Only the quiet certainty of someone who had known this for 5 years and was still not accustomed to saying it out loud to another person who had equal reason to claim it. They stood side by side in the school corridor for 1 full minute without speaking, looking at a painting of a dinosaur that was far from home. Something shifted between them. Not dramatically. Not enough for either of them to name it. But it shifted. Siwen appeared from around a corner, assessed the two of them standing together in front of his painting, and said, "It took me 4 sessions. Your mother told me," Jamin said. "Good," Siwen said, apparently satisfied, and went back to his class. That weekend, Jamin suggested street food instead of a restaurant. Mary looked at him when he said it, a quick, assessing look, then agreed. They walked to the night market 2 blocks from the apartment, Siwen between them, and ate from paper cups and small plates balanced on their palms. Jamin burned his tongue on something spicy and said nothing about it, and Siwen observed this with obvious satisfaction. "You should blow on it first," Siwen told him. "I'll remember that," Jamin said. "Every time," Siwen said firmly. Every single time. It was the first time Siwen had given him advice. It was, in the way these things work, considerably more significant than it appeared. These moments were adding up. Small, unspectacular, consistent. Jamin had begun to understand that consistency was the entire project, that trust between a parent and a child was not built in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of ordinary afternoons, each one saying simply, "I came. I stayed. I will come again." He was beginning to understand it. He was not yet good at it. But he was beginning. If you're still watching and this story has got you emotional, drop a comment below. And if you haven't liked the video yet, now is a great time. It genuinely helps the channel. Then came the Saturday that reordered everything. Mary's friend Naomi had come to visit, a bright, direct woman who had known Mary since before the divorce and had, by her own account, spent 2 years actively hoping something happened to Jamin's car on a steep hill. She arrived with groceries and an easy familiarity that told Siwen everything was fine, and behind her came a man named Oh Junpyo. Junpyo was Naomi's colleague, mid-30s, relaxed in the uncomplicated way of someone who had never needed to perform comfort because he actually felt it. He crouched when he entered the apartment, immediately at Siwen's eye level, and said, "You must be the dinosaur expert. I've been warned." Siwen looked at him with the measuring expression. Then, "Which ones do you think would win in a fight?" "I think that completely depends on terrain and time of day," Junpyo said, without hesitation, "and I think you probably have opinions on that." Siwen's expression opened like a door. "Yes," he said. "Sit down." Junpyo sat on the floor. Jamin, arriving 20 minutes later for a scheduled visit, walked into an apartment where Siwen was cross-legged on the rug delivering a detailed tactical briefing on late Cretaceous predator hierarchies to Junpyo, who was listening with apparent total investment. Mary was in the kitchen with Naomi, and there was the sound of laughter from that direction, the unguarded kind, the kind that surfaces only around people you genuinely trust. Jamin stood in the doorway and felt, for the first time since this had all begun, something close to jealousy. Not of Junpyo as a romantic threat. Not that. Something more specific, the jealousy of watching someone do effortlessly what you have been laboring at, of seeing a man sit on a floor with your son and make the child light up inside of 30 seconds, and knowing that you had been trying for weeks to produce that exact expression, and it had not arrived like that, not yet, not with the ease that it arrived for a stranger who simply sat down and asked the right question. He stood there long enough for Mary to notice him from the kitchen. She came out, dried her hands on a towel, and said hello to him with a neutrality that told him she understood what he was looking at. He watched Junpyo for the rest of the afternoon without engineering any particular response to what he was watching. He watched how Junpyo listened, not with the performative attentiveness of someone who wanted to be seen listening, but with actual interest, actual follow-up questions, the listening of a person who had genuinely decided that the conversation mattered. He watched how Mary was around him, shoulders lower, voice easier, the particular relaxation that comes from being in a space where you do not have to manage anything. He stayed through dinner. He ate what Naomi served. He helped Siwon find a page in the dinosaur book he had given him. He did not compete. He did not perform. He kept his observations and stored them. That night, after Siwon was in bed and Naomi and Junpyo had gone, he stood in the apartment doorway with his jacket in his hand and said to Mary, "What does he do differently?" Mary leaned against the door frame. "He doesn't try to impress Siwon," she said. "He just treats him like a person who has interesting things to say." "Which he does." She paused. "You've been trying to earn Siwon's approval." Junpyo wasn't trying to earn anything. He was just present. Jaemin was quiet for a moment. "I've been approaching this like a problem to solve," he said. "Yes," Mary said. "And Siwon is not a problem." "I know that." "You know it intellectually," she said, not unkindly. "But your instinct is still to strategize, to assess what is needed and deploy it. Siwon doesn't want to be managed. He wants someone to sit on the floor and be interested in the thing he is interested in, for no reason other than that he is interested in it." Jaemin looked at her. "Like I just had a class," he said. The corner of her mouth moved. "Go home, Jaemin." He went home. He did not sleep for a long time. The following week he stopped calibrating and started simply showing up. He arrived at the apartment and sat on the floor and asked Siwon which dinosaur he thought had the most underrated defensive strategy. And the next 45 minutes were the most animated conversation he had ever had about the Ankylosaurus's tail club and its implications. He did not bring a gift. He did not have an agenda. He was simply there. Siwon, for the first time, leaned against him while explaining something. It lasted 3 seconds. Then the boy sat back up and kept talking. But those 3 seconds existed, and Mary, watching from the hallway, turned around before either of them could see her expression. The school winter performance was announced 2 weeks later. Siwon had a part, one of the narrator roles, 12 lines, which he had been practicing in the apartment with the commitment of someone preparing for an international summit. He told Jaemin about it one afternoon with the specific restraint of a child who is very excited, but is trying to appear professional about it. 12 lines, Jaemin said. 13, actually, Siwon said. They added 1. I memorized it the same day. Jaemin had a board meeting scheduled for the afternoon of the performance. It had been on the calendar for 6 weeks, 14 senior partners, 2 major presentations, a restructuring proposal that required his physical presence in the room to carry. He sat at his desk for one morning staring at both calendar entries and made the call without prolonged deliberation. He sent his deputy. He arrived at the school hall 8 minutes before the performance began, took a seat at the back, and watched his son walk onto that small stage and deliver 13 lines in a voice that did not shake once. Afterward, as parents filed toward their children in the corridor, Siwon was scanning the crowd. His eyes moved methodically from face to face, searching. Then they found Jaemin, standing at the back near the doors. They looked at each other across the room. Siwon smiled. Not a large smile, small, private, the slightly sideways smile of someone who had been hoping for something and is cautious about the size of their relief. But it was real, and it was directed at him, and Jaemin held it like something he would not put down for a long time. That night, at 9:30, his phone rang. Mary's number, but when he answered it was Siwon's voice. Dad. The word arrived simply, without fanfare. Can you come to my soccer game too? Jaemin sat very still. In the background he could hear Mary's footsteps stop. A silence behind the boy's breathing. Yes, Jaemin said. Tell me when and I'll be there. Saturday, Siwon said. It starts at 10. Don't be late because Coach Lee gets annoyed if parents arrive during warm-up. I will be there before warm-up, Jaemin said. Okay, Siwon said, apparently satisfied. Bye. The line ended. Jaemin set his phone face down on the desk and sat in his office alone for a long time. Mary had heard all of it. She was standing in the hallway of the apartment with her back against the wall, and she was looking at the ceiling, and her eyes were bright, and she did not move until she was certain her face had returned to something she was comfortable with. 3 days later, Jaemin asked if they could talk. Not about logistics, not about Siwon's schedule. About them, the unfinished architecture of what had happened 5 years ago and what it had cost. They sat on the bench near the river again, in the cold this time, their breath visible in the night air, making small clouds. Siwon was at Naomi's for the evening. The city glittered across the water. I need to say something, Jamin said. And I need to say it without making it about defending myself, because I understand now that defending myself was the problem from the beginning. Mary looked at the water. I punished you, he said. Not because I was certain you had done what the photographs suggested. Underneath the anger, I knew the images were missing something. The framing was too clean, the timing too convenient. But admitting doubt meant admitting I didn't have control of the situation. He paused. I chose my ego over the possibility that I was wrong. And I let the most important person in my life walk out of it because I was too proud to make one phone call. Mary was quiet. I didn't just lose a marriage, he said. I lost you. And I missed the first 5 years of my son's life. And both of those things are consequences I chose, even if I didn't understand at the time that I was choosing them. The river moved. A boat passed in the distance. Then Mary said, quietly, if I hadn't come back. If I had never walked through those doors that night, would you have ever looked for us? He did not answer quickly. He sat with the question honestly, which was the only way it deserved to be answered. I should have looked 5 years ago, he said. Before the papers. Before the silence. I should have refused to let a week pass without hearing your voice. And the honest answer is that I didn't, and I can explain why, but explaining it doesn't change it. He looked at her. I will regret that for the rest of my life. That's the true answer. Mary nodded slowly. She looked at the dark water for a long time. Thank you, she said finally, for saying it without the escape route. No embrace. No declaration. But the quality of the silence between them changed the way a room changes temperature, not all at once, but in a way you notice because you have been cold for a long time and something has shifted. The dinner happened on a Sunday. Mary's apartment, home-cooked food, nothing designed to impress anyone. Naomi came and was disruptive in the best possible way. Junpyo arrived with dessert and promptly lost a dinosaur argument to Siwon within 4 minutes of sitting down. Jamin sat at the table in the small warm apartment and ate food he had not ordered from anywhere and listened to his son hold court and understood that all the things he had thought mattered, the boardrooms, the headlines, the careful management of his public image, were furniture in a house he had never actually lived in. Halfway through the meal, Siwon looked up at him across the table and said, "You can come to my soccer game every week if you want." "I want," Jamin said. Siwon nodded, satisfied, and went back to his food. By the time the dishes were cleared, Siwon was fading, the long spiral into exhaustion that children do, first slowing, then leaning, then surrendering entirely. He ended up on the sofa with his head on Jamin's shoulder, asleep before anyone had formally decided the evening was over. Jamin sat very still. He kept one hand loosely at his side. He did not move for a long time. Mary came from the kitchen with a blanket and stopped when she saw them. She stood there for a moment, her son's weight, her son's trust, the face of the man who had not been there and was now beginning to learn what being there actually meant. She draped the blanket over Siwon carefully without waking him. Jamin looked up at her. In a voice low enough not to carry, he said, "I don't want to take him from you. I want to stand beside you. Both of you. For as long as you'll allow it." Mary looked at him for a long moment. The woman who had walked into that ballroom with nothing but truth and a child and 5 years of quiet survival, who had asked for nothing except that he understand what he had done and be willing to do differently, she looked at this man who was learning, slowly and imperfectly and genuinely, what it meant to stay. She did not say yes. She sat down beside him on the sofa, their son breathing between them, the city outside carrying on at its usual pace, entirely indifferent to the fact that something broken was, with great care and no guarantees, beginning again. And she placed her hand over his. That's where we leave them, not with a fairy tale ending, but with something more honest than that. A family at the beginning of the beginning, choosing to try. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment telling us what moment hit you hardest, and we'll see you in the next one.